What is up, guys? Welcome back to another GeekaWhat video, and in today's video we've got an awesome RTX 3080 Ti gaming PC build for you. In this video I'm going to run you through all of the components I chose and why, taking a deep dive into the performance of the new 3080 Ti and put this system together from start right through to finish. So without any further ado, subscribe if you aren't already and ding that notification bell. But let's do this. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but we're going to kick this build off by installing as many components into the motherboard as possible. I know this is what we do in pretty much every build, but for good reason. This is going to make the build process as simple as possible and allows us to do as much as we can outside of the case before everything starts to get that little bit more fiddly. For the CPU choice in this system, I've gone for a Ryzen 7 5800X. I would recommend you go for a Ryzen 7 chip with the 3080 Ti, as this is going to give you better performance. The last thing you want to do is get your hands on a shiny new graphics card, which is hard enough as it is in 2021, and then bottleneck it with a weak processor. AMD have well and truly killed the game in 2021, and it's great to see them well and truly on top. Now, the next component is, of course, the RAM for this build. I've got a kit of GeIL Orion RGB. Now, this is a dual channel kit, perfect for Ryzen, and with speeds around 3600 MHz, it's going to work great alongside the Ryzen 7 CPU choice for this system. It's available in a quite bright red colour, but I have gone a little bit more simple, I have gone a bit more classy, and I have gone for a more metallic grey instead. This is one of their brand new memory kits and it looks fantastic. And I'll link it alongside all the other components today with latest pricing and availability down in the description below. For this build, we're going to slot the RAM into the 2nd and 4th RAM DIMM slots from the CPU, and they slot in really nice and easily. A little something like this. It's actually got a Ryzen sticker on it, which is a bit weird. I'm sure these work okay for Intel CPUs as well, though not many people are buying those in 2021, at least for gaming in a build like this. Sorry, Intel. Now, the final component we're going to pop into the motherboard is the M.2 NVMe drive. This is Adata's Gigabyte S70, and it's a Gen 4 powerhouse of an SSD. With speeds up to 7 gigabytes per second on that Gen 4 standard, you really are getting blazingly fast speeds. This will not only help your system to boot up really quickly, but also provide super fast loading times for games. As GPUs become more and more powerful, the bottleneck is actually moving towards storage, believe it or not. Not as important for a 3060 or 3060 Ti, but for a 3080 Ti, this is what you want to go for, or any other decent Gen 4 drive. And with that done, we can move on over into the case. We can take the completed motherboard assembly and put it in the chassis choice for today's build before looking at the graphics card. Now, this is Corsair's 5000D Airflow. It's part of the wider 5000 series that also includes a IQ version that comes with loads of RGB fans and a glass front panel. This, though, is very airflow oriented and should help us keep our temperatures to the absolute minimum. Plus, the CPU cooler choice we've gone for does include some nice RGB fans, so we're all covered off there. If you'd like to see our custom loop build in the white glass version of this case, check that out in the card section now, but I love this thing, it's a great option. Let's get it out of the box, take off those side panels, and then we can move the motherboard over. With the motherboard into place, it brings us nicely on to the next component today, the cooler. Now, this is Gigabyte Aorus's Waterforce X360. It's a 360mm rad with a screen on it. How cool is that? You also get some RGB fans, and I think we can mount it quite nicely on display in the case here, and that will look absolutely awesome for our build today. It also won't impede upon any GPU mounting room we might need for our hefty RTX 3080 Ti. I've got to say, Gigabyte, that's the best packaging for a cooler I've ever seen. Soft foam, everything really nicely spaced out, plenty of room, makes things super simple. So let's see if the mounting solution is just as good once we've screwed the radiator on. Once the radiator is in, securing the water block down is actually surprisingly simple. You want to take the included AMD stock cooler bracket that comes pre-installed on the motherboard, alongside these 4 standoff posts. These are going to fasten on top of the backplate through the motherboard and provide a really nice platform for which we can screw the CPU water block into place. We're also going to take this included bracket and pop this on the bottom of the CPU water block. And this is what we'll use to actually tighten it onto the motherboard. That actually wasn't too bad. The cooler is now on and the top actually rotates as well to make sure the screen, when it turns on, is the right orientation. Something that's quite important actually. You don't want to be reading your CPU temperatures upside down. So nice one, Gigabyte. That moves us nicely on to the penultimate component today for this build, which is of course the graphics card. Now this is Gigabyte's GeForce RTX 3080 Ti. It's basically the top end RTX graphics card, excluding the really expensive 3090. With 12 gigabytes of video memory and around a 10% performance increase in our testing, sometimes more across the 3080, it's a really powerful GPU. Gains on the last generation RTX 2080 Ti and 2080 Super are of course strong, but we already knew that from September's launch of the 3080. Can you believe it's been nearly a year since RTX 3000 series dropped and availability is still quite tricky? Now, getting your hands on a card is the most difficult bit of gaming in 2021. Good pre-built options in the US and UK will be linked down below, but there are some glimmers of hope for the DIY builders out there. Recent changes to the way that Ethereum works will basically eradicate mining within the cryptocurrency in the coming months. They haven't put an exact date on it yet, but this should help to ease up GPU supply. What's more, Nvidia, to their credit, are making more RTX 3000 cards than they have for any previous generation architecture, which is obviously good news. I appreciate that that doesn't change the fact that the cards are largely still out of stock, but hopefully the more cards Nvidia and AMD release, the better availability should become. This GeIL OC card from Gigabyte is right close to the MSRP of the reference and founders designs as well, which is a huge bonus. So kudos to Gigabyte for managing to get this at a reasonable MSRP. Specs on this card are as good as you'd expect, and they'll be on your screen now, as will a gaming benchmark summary with the frame rates for all the different titles we tested out. Hold on though, because we'll take a deeper delve into performance as usual in just a moment's time. For now though, let's go ahead and get the graphics card installed into our second and third PCIe slots. Here we go. The case actually doesn't look as empty as I'd feared with that 360mm Aorus cooler as well. So happy days all around, let's get it screwed in and get it powered up. And in order to power the graphics card up, we've got to install the last component today, the power supply. Now this is Cooler Master's MWE Gold 750W V2. It's a fully modular 80 plus gold certified power supply that has a semi-fanless design, keeping it nice and quiet, and it comes in at an affordable price point. If you'd like to compare pricing and availability though on all components today, check out either the links below or the dedicated web article in the cards section now on desktop and mobile. Let's go ahead though and get the power supply in, get everything powered up, and then boot our system up for the first time to see just how good it looks when it's all powered up in the only way we know how here on the GeekaWhat channel. Roll that montage. Lovely stuff. Now we've seen just how good the system looks when it's all powered up, let's take a dive and see just how well it performs. Here at the GeekaWhat channel, we've tested 15 of the biggest titles out there to give us a really accurate representation. First off, on your screen now is a summary, a snapshot view with all the different numbers that we gathered on this 3080 Ti. We're going to take a deeper delve into some of our focused titles in a moment's time, so hang tight. But if you'd like to see the full unedited gaming benchmark runs for all the titles on your screen, check out the playlist in the cards section now on our benchmarking YouTube channel. The first of the focused titles though is GTA 5, an old classic but still a great performance test. At 4K high settings we got an impressive 127 frames a second. Tested in the game's trusty in-game benchmarking mode, giving repeatable results that you guys can try at home on your cards too. Next up is Watch Dogs Legions, and at 4K high settings with RTX enabled, we got a pretty impressive 84 frames a second, with 75 and 68 for the 90 and 99th percentile results, giving us a pretty solid improvement over the 3080, our coverage of which you can find in the cards section now. The next of those titles we tested out was Apex Legends. At 4K high settings, it was another impressive showing, giving us 155 FPS on average. This is around 16 FPS more than what we got with MSI's incredibly expensive Supreme 3080. This Gigabyte 3080 Ti is a much cheaper, cooler version, despite of course the fact this card is inherently more expensive. Next up then is Call of Duty's Black Ops Cold War, and we tested this game out at a couple of different settings. First off is 1440p high settings with ray tracing enabled, giving us 67 frames a second, tested in the game's Zombies mode, which is what most people are playing in Cold War. Tune up to 4K high settings and ditch ray tracing, and the frame rate does go up to 88 frames a second, giving you very, very playable results and a great visual gaming experience. All of our testing today has been done with both NVIDIA FrameView and also MSI Afterburner's Riva Tuner, which we're using for the graph that you can see on screen throughout all of the different benchmarks today. Valorant is the next title today, probably the easiest on the list, but still incredibly popular. At 4K high settings, we got 356 FPS on average, with 310 and 280 for the 90 and 99th percentile results. Visually, the game looked great. The straight rasterization in Valorant is super easy for the 3080 Ti and yielded some fantastic results. Speaking of fantastic results, Cyberpunk, that's not normally two words that go in the same sentence. But today we do have some decent numbers to report. At 4K medium settings in Cyberpunk with no ray tracing, no DLSS, we got 64 FPS. Turn ray tracing to medium, but turn DLSS on. DLSS, of course, being NVIDIA's fancy resolution scaler that helps offset the frame rate loss of ray tracing, and we get 59 FPS. That's only 5 frames per second less with ray tracing enabled through the power of DLSS. Visually, the game looked really quite fantastic actually, and for Cyberpunk, it was a really playable experience. Once again, we saw some solid gains over the 3080, which is of course a good piece cheaper, but keep your eyes peeled for a full GPU comparison video soon with all of the new cards on the market, including of course the 3070 Ti. And that brings me on to the final game in the benchmark lineup today, Fortnite. At 1080p competitive settings, the game performed amazingly well, as to be expected. 263 FPS on average was not a bad result, with 243 and 200 for the 90 and 99th percentile results. Frame rate was solid, it didn't really drop too much, and competitive settings at 1080p on a 3080 Ti is one hell of a gaming experience. And on that note, that pretty much wraps it up for today's video. Thank you very much for watching, get subscribed if you aren't already, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.